Okay, today we're going to be talking about the functions of Congress. This is like your Congress overview / basics video, talking about what is Congress, what are the houses, what are the differences between the two houses, what's the same about the two houses, what powers do they have, how representative are they, all that kind of stuff. So this is going to be the base building block you will need before you can really start to talk about more in advance, like in terms of what kind of the detail of how effective they are or not effective they are. So this is like our kind of starter video that you'll definitely need to know kind of inside and out. Now, as always, if I can click on the right thing. Now, as always, there is some further reading, and you can get there through the basic revision guide, which is actually pretty good on Congress. This one, and by pretty good, I don't mean it's always good, but like it actually has quite a lot of detail and some quite good bullet points. But then, of course, you can go more detailed on this one. But I also found a really good website that talks about some of the differences between the representatives and the Senate, and it's definitely worth clicking on that one. You know, go to the PowerPoint link, go to the PowerPoint file, click on that link, have a good read through, because I think something like Congress, because it's such a key part of the legislature, you need to be really confident on this one and be like, yep, I know what it is, I know how it works, I can talk about it at length, because so many of your essays, whether it's on democracy or parties or anything, there's so many essays that will eventually link back to Congress. It's the same in the UK. Like, you can't write about UK politics unless you understand Parliament and the Prime Minister. Here, Congress, presidency, you've got to kind of know them inside and out. So let's go. Congress. So when we say Congress, we are talking about not about one house, but about two. We're talking about that big building which is up on what they call the Hill in Washington. And just like in the UK system, it contains two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And when I say houses, I'm kind of talking kind of metaphorically here. I'm talking about two chambers of lawmaking. It is a bicameral legislature, the same as the Houses of Parliament in the UK, whereas something like the Scottish Parliament would be a unicameral legislature, because there's only kind of one house in it. So, and in many ways, this was modelled on the UK system. They had that kind of bizarre thing when the founding fathers were there. They were like, well, we want to leave the UK and we want to lose our connection to the crown and tyranny, and we want to have representation, but we actually quite like the UK system, so we're going to model a lot of our stuff on the UK, hence why we have what's known as the upper chamber and the lower chamber and the bicameral system and an executive and all these kind of things. And that's why the kind of similarities and differences are so kind of complex, because it's a system that was modeled and then improved on by the US from the UK system. So let's talk a little bit more about them. Both of these houses are elected, which is of course different to the UK one, but they're elected at different times and they're elected in different ways. So the Senate, you have two senators from each state. Two senators, so two from Texas, two from New York, two from Ohio, whatever. It doesn't matter where the state is, there are two. Whereas in the House of Representatives, the number of representatives they have is proportional to their state population. So huge states will have many, and tiny states will only have one. Let me see if I can give you some little kind of figures here. So Texas has 36, for example. Now, of course, because it's based on population, that changes, because over time, certain states' populations will grow and other states' populations will fall percentage-wise. And so that means every 10 years, when they do a census, they'll have to kind of rejig the balance in the House of Representatives, whereas in the Senate, it's always two. Okay, and if you want some more examples of that, have a look in the textbooks. But House of Representatives, it's by population, but it will change over time. Which means there's kind of a bit of a battle about kind of like populations. You know, states want to have good populations when the censuses kind of come around. Now, that also means that the representative role that they follow is somewhat different, because for the Senate, each senator represents the whole state. So they don't kind of say, well, this senator represents this half and this senator represents that half. No. Each senator has responsibility for the whole state. So it's like a kind of a joint thing. And those senators can actually come from different parties. So you could have a Democrat and a Republican from one state. But most of the time, you're probably going to get two Democrats or two Republicans, depending on where you're coming from. But this is different because in the House of Representatives, each representative has their own district. So that place where they've been elected, that very, very small area, which is theirs. So the House of Representatives in many ways looks more like the House of Commons here. Think kind of constituencies. You know, each representative has their own constituency, although they would probably call it a district. I'm just going to turn off my nightlight because everything's going a little bit yellow. There we are. Okay, cool. And this kind of means that the responsibilities are perhaps a little bit different between senators and representatives. By the way, we can use acronym. We can shorten both of these down. The House of Representatives we can just call the House. The Senate we're going to call the Senate. People that are in the Senate are called senators, and people that are in the House of Representatives are called representatives. Okay, so we can shorten them down slightly, and you can do the same in your essays. Now, this also makes a huge numerical difference. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives, and you can see them there in that picture over that side. It is a huge room, and when you see things like the State of the Union address and these kind of big groups, that's always done in the House of Representatives. The Senate is far smaller. There is only 100 of them. 50 states times it by 2 because there's 2 senators. That gives you 100 over and over. Now, how are they elected? Well, the House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, the whole House, which is pretty short when you think about it. You know, they are constantly being renewed. Any representative can be gone 600 days later, effectively. So the whole House is done every 2 years. And the idea behind this is it means that it's constantly being refreshed with whatever the current political mood of America is. And when you get a presidential election, they are electing the entire House at the same time. And then when you get the midterms, you're not electing the president, but you are again electing the entire House once more. So you can get kind of shifts, big shifts within the House of Representatives as the political mood of the country changes, especially if there is a popular or an unpopular president. Whereas the Senate is very different. In this one, you elect 1/3 of the House every 2 years, which means if you are elected, then you are there for 6 years, because you would be there, you'd be elected, and then another third of the House would be elected 2 years later, another third of the House would be elected 2 years after that, and then you would be up for election the 2 years after that. So each senator has a 6-year term, but the House will change slowly over time, because these big political shifts will only kind of change 1/3 of the time. So imagine you had a fully Republican House. It wouldn't happen, but stick with me. If you had a fully Republican House, but then the whole country changed to a Democrat mind of view, the Senate would still only change 1/3 at a time. So the idea is it kind of provides stability, a bit of a break, perhaps quite a conservative small c approach to politics to stop any kind of big sweeping changes coming in perhaps too quickly, or to look at another way, maybe preventing necessary change depending on how you want to argue it. So that's our basics. They are both legislative lawmaking chambers, and unlike in the UK, they are equal. They are both required to make laws, and their powers are very, very similar. So let's talk about them. What are the powers of Congress? Well, the first power, the most obvious power, is lawmaking. It's a bicameral chamber. Either house can start the laws, and we're going to talk in a future video more about the kind of process of how that kind of lawmaking works, because there is some complexity and some controversy about how it's done, but both houses have to approve the same bill before it becomes law. It's not like in the UK where one house can just delay it or anything like that. You know, any law has to get through both. They also both oversee the executive. So think select committees in the UK. They have committees, they have investigation committees. The term often used is oversight. They can conduct investigations, and they can generally kind of make sure the executive is doing what it's supposed to be doing. That is their role. And they also confirm the appointments of the executive, whether it is Supreme Court appointments, whether it is appointments to the cabinet of Donald Trump, or whoever happens to be the president, which is different to the UK, because the Prime Minister can just go, right, your education, your the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You know, he gives out those jobs. It's part of his patronage. Whereas in the US, the president goes, I want you and I want you. But then it has to go off to Congress, and Congress will make that final call, yes, no. They normally say yes, because if a president is clever, they will kind of sound out Congress before they start to see which way the vote is likely to go. He doesn't want to kind of make a battle. But again, we'll talk more about that in a future video. They can also override the veto. Now, in a previous video, I talked about how each branch overrides everything else. And so if Congress passes a law, the president can veto it, and then Congress can override the president's veto with a 2/3 majority. So it kind of goes law, veto, veto. It doesn't often happen. It's pretty rare. And in fact, Obama was only overridden once. So passed the law, vetoed, and then no, we really want this law. Only happened once. I've mentioned it on a previous video, and it was to do with Saudi Arabia. It was the idea, it was to allow people to sue Saudi Arabia for the events of 9/11. So if you'd lost a family member from that awful terrorist attack, you were allowed to go and sue the Saudi Arabian government for whatever part they had kind of played in that. Obama vetoed it, and then Congress said, no, we really want that to go through. They also have to ratify treaties. So a treaty is when America or a country makes a deal with another country, and then they sign a treaty together to say what your responsibilities and what my responsibilities are. A very famous one would be the creation of the UN in like 1945, 46, something like that. The UN was kind of created, and then it came back to America, and the president said, we want to create the UN, and then that treaty had to be ratified, agreed to by both houses of Congress. There have been a few more recently. I think the last one was 2013, but there was a famous one in 2010, which was called the START Treaty, S-T-A-R-T, which was to do with nuclear weapon de-escalation between the US and Russia, which could be a useful example for your exams to show that that the US makes treaties, and then the Congress then has to ratify them and agree to them. As you should be aware from previous video, both houses have to be involved in constitutional amendments. They both have to give 2/3 of approval before it then goes off to the states, where they have to get 3/4 of state legislatures to agree for any kind of constitutional amendments to go through. That was that's a slavery picture or an anti-slavery picture, because that was obviously a constitutional amendment. The impeaching process, very topical as of, what are we now, the 6th of October. Will they impeach Trump? Well, if they do, it has to go through the House of Representatives first, and then it goes through the Senate. So the process is threefold. They investigate, House of Representatives proposes it, and then there's a trial in the Senate, and the Senate has that kind of final vote. Let's see what happens with that. They would also have to confirm a replacement vice president. So for whatever reason, if a president was removed or died, then the vice president becomes the president, which means there's no vice president. So rather than then doing another election, because America's elections are in fixed locations, the Congress would then confirm the replacement vice president. Now, our example here is a man called Gerald Ford. Now, Gerald Ford was under Nixon. Nixon had a vice president who left. Gerald Ford was appointed as the new vice president, appointed, not elected, appointed as the replacement vice president. Nixon then, of course, resigned over Watergate because of the impeachment threat, and Gerald Ford, who was never elected into this position, becomes president. So there's your example for that. Now, this is when we start to get into the technical powers and then the actual powers. So legal powers versus political powers, all those kind of things, or political reality might be a better phrase. Technically, Congress has the power to declare war. In reality, the last time they did this was 1941 against Japan. But America has been involved in a lot of wars since then. Vietnam, Afghanistan, the Iraq War, the other Iraq War, military intervention in Syria and Libya most recently. Huge amounts of military intervention by America has taken place. But Congress has not been asked for, it has not had to give its approval, despite that technically being a power of Congress. Definitely something to discuss in an essay. And here's an unusual one. This is a man called John Quincy Adams. Now, if the Electoral College does not produce an overall winner, meaning over 50% of the Electoral College votes for one individual, then it is down to Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives actually, to elect the president to decide who kind of wins. Now, so think of terms when we did electoral systems, it's to do with an absolute majority. So the electoral college is the votes that come in from the various states. We'll talk about that in a future video. But an absolute majority is over 50%. So it's not if there's a dead heat. So my phrasing there is probably slightly misleading. It's not if there's a complete draw. It's if no one has got over that 50% marker. The last time this happened was in 1824, and John Quincy Adams was the beneficiary of it. This is one of the other reasons why America is often seen as a two-party system, because if they had multiple parties picking up lots of votes all the time, then this problem of a non-absolute majority would come up more often. So these are the powers of Congress. The big three are the first three. This is what they spend most of their time doing: making laws, overseeing the executive, confirming appointments. All of the others are more as and when they come along. You know, they're not kind of like the constant things that they would be doing. They're always there as available things that they could do, but most of the time they spend their times doing the first three. Another point: these two are the special powers of the Senate. Oh, hang on, I've put that in the wrong place. I've done a bad thing, but listen to me carefully here. So the Senate is the only one that confirms appointments, and the Senate is the only one that confirms treaties. I think I've just put that in the wrong place. Let me double check. The Senate is the only one that confirms treaties. Double check, double check, double check. And the reason, yes, sole powers of the Senate is ratifying treaties, but the reason I've put it on that one is because if there was no absolute majority, then the House of Representatives elects the president and the Senate elects the vice president within that particular circumstances. So you could make an argument that the Senate is slightly more powerful than Congress, but we'll come back to that debate in a minute, or now. So how different, in fact, are they? How similar? How different? Well, both of them have most power. So most on the previous screen, most of the stuff that came up is that both houses do, other than the couple that I isolated for you. Both houses are required to pass laws, and that is the key point about the similarity of them in this bicameral system. They have the same wages, despite the fact there's only 2 senators and there's more representatives. They earn exactly the same. Both of them, of course, are required for constitutional amendments. That's quite an important one, which is why I wanted to kind of emphasize it. And they're both involved in things like oversight, such as the committees. It's not like the UK system where the select committees is definitely kind of skewed a bit more towards the Commons. So in most ways, they are the same, but let's look at the differences. The term lengths are different. Now, I'm not saying one's better or one's worse, but they are different. If you are a senator, then you are far more likely to be given a key role, such as chairing one of these committees that's required for conditional oversight. Well, my words are going so wrong here. You're far more like congressional oversight. That's what I'm looking for. You're far more likely to chair one of these select committees. If you are a senator, then you're far more likely to launch a presidential campaign than if you are a member of the House of Representatives. 16 of the last 17 Democratic presidential nominees, they didn't all win, have been either senators or ex-senators. So Obama was one, Hillary Clinton was one, Bill Clinton was one, and so on. There's only been one from the last 50 years or 60 years or so on that actually wasn't a member of the Senate. That's not necessarily because they have to be, but senators tend to be more well known. Why? Because a senator represents a whole state, and of course there's only 2 of them as opposed to 50 of them or whatever it might be. So they tend to be more well known, tend to be more famous, tend to be taken on more kind of responsibility of committees. So although they're technically having the same powers, the political reality is that perhaps a senator has a kind of a bigger profile as a result. The Senate has 2 additional powers, as I mentioned on the previous slide. They confirm the appointments, which is a key role, especially when it's controversial, like Brett Kavanaugh and so on, and they also ratify treaties. But the extra powers can work the other way as well. Remember, it is the House of Representatives that starts the impeachment process. And there's also one that says that the House of Representatives has to start money bills or anything to kind of do with taxation and things like that, which is a minor point because ultimately it still has to go through both houses, but they have to start with the representatives. But speaking of these representatives, are these representatives representative? You know what I'm saying? Now, I've got two websites here that I'd like to show you and talk through, but I'm not going to go through everything. I just want to show you some big points. But if you think about when we talked about representation in the UK Parliament, we're talking about things like such as, does it have enough women? Does it have enough people from ethnic minorities? How does it represent education and race and religion and all those kind of things? That's what we're talking about when we say how representative is the representatives. Now, of course, it'll never be exactly right because they're re-electing every kind of 2 years. But the question is it approximately right or is it way, way, way off? Well, let's have a little look at this. This is a really awesome site, part of the Guardian website, and it says, does the new Congress reflect you? And I'd like you this week to kind of dig through this website yourself and kind of have a little look. And what you basically do is you put in your vital statistics, and it then kind of tells you how many people from Congress are like you. And apparently 535 of them are like me. But let's have a little look here. So first of all, as a bloke, 49% of America are blokes, so basically 50-50. But look, in Congress, 76% are male, updated in June the 7th, 2019. 76% of Congress, and of those, and of course in Republicans, then 92% of Republicans are male. So in most of these, you're going to see a pattern that the Democrats tend to be more representative than the Republicans. The Republicans tend to be male and white and old. It's a stereotype, but you'll see that the statistics show that that is often true. The Democrats are more progressive, more liberal in this particular area. So we're definitely behind, but it is getting better, and I'll come back to that point in a minute. In terms of sexuality, 95% of the US is straight, but 98% of Congress is straight, and 100% of Republicans are straight. So it's a little off. And let's talk about age. Under 35, 20% of the US is under 35, but only 2% of Congress is that way. Now, of course, a lot of that is down to the fact that the age limit for congressmen is set at, I think it's like 25 or something like that. I think it's in one of the textbooks. So you couldn't have it, but it doesn't get any much better when you go a bit further. So if we go up to 35s to 49s, 31% of America is between 35 and 49, but only 22%, so basically we're talking 10% below, is of this particular age group. Now here's the one that should worry you a little bit more, or is unrepresentative. If we go to the over 65s, only 20% of the US is over 65, but over 30% of Congress is over 65, and in terms of the Democrats, that's nearly 40% of them is over 65. So the elderly is overrepresented, and for once, it's not the Republicans, it's the Democrats that are pulling that statistic up massively. Let's talk about ethnicity. 72% of the US is white, and Congress is 77% white. And it's, again, look massively in the Republican side here, which is pulling that kind of side up. So the white ratio isn't too bad overall. But when we start to drill down into other ethnicities, look at this. Hispanic, 16% of the US is Hispanic, but only 6% of Congress. That's 10% off. Black, 12% versus 9%, perhaps not too bad, but look, it's all in the Democrats. Only 0.8% of Republicans are blacks. Asian, 5% approximately, down to 2%, not too bad, maybe, but it's all coming from the Democrats. Native American, very similar percentages here, but remember some of these very, very small ethnic minorities are very, very small. So in which case, actually, very small percentage changes are actually quite significant. Middle Eastern, you're going 3% down to 1%, 1.5%. So you're basically halving their representation here. Multiracial, actually pretty much kind of spot on. There's some weird anomalies in religion. Basically, Congress is a lot more religious than America is. Have a look at this one. So 69% of America is Christian, so approximately 70%, but 80% of Congress is Christian. Here's a random one. Congress is a lot more Jewish than America is. Only 1.9% of the US is, but 7% of Congress is, and nearly all of that comes from the Democrats. So they're overrepresented, but other religions such as... other religions are actually pretty much spot on, but the one that's not is the non-religious group, the atheists. there's 7.1% declared atheists in America, but Congress is down at 0.2%. Now, whether, of course, that is real atheists or people that have just kind of declared that way is a different kind of a question, but that's your big underrepresented group in terms of religion, whereas Jewish and Christians are your ones which are overrepresented. But I guess the other question is not so much what is there, but which way are we going? Now, Congress has become far more diverse, and the current Congress is the most racially and ethnically and genderally diverse one they've ever had. It's definitely moving in the right direction, and I would suggest that you have a look at this second website talking about the changing face of Congress, and just see which way it's moving. You can see all of these bars are getting bigger, and you can see in regards of women in Congress, although it's still low, it's still too low, it's definitely moving in the right direction. So it depends how you want to argue it. You can still say, look, it's not good enough, or you can say it's not good enough, but actually it's getting better, and that's a slightly different response or a different argument in an essay. Share of immigrants is actually going down slightly, but that might be more because America's attitude to immigration has changed. The military is now having far less influence in Congress. You're talking, if you go back to 1973, then 81% of members of the Senate had some sort of military experience, which is huge when you think about it. Nearly all of them have college degrees. You could maybe equate this to the overrepresentation of private school members in the UK, but it's a similar idea. Now, of course, there's a follow-up argument, which is, well, don't you want educated congressmen? Well, of course you do, but it does perhaps mean that it doesn't necessarily represent those people from poorer, less educated backgrounds that haven't had those kind of there's a group of people that might feel that Congress doesn't represent them. And it has become more religiously diverse over time, as you can see here. You can see that there has been some sort of shift and a big decline in the Protestant makeup of America. But most of that has come from an increase in the Catholic makeup rather than huge inroads in the other areas. But have a look through and see what you think. So there we have it. That is our look at Congress. You should now know what Congress is, what the two houses are, what their powers are, what the differences are between the two houses. You should be able to discuss whether the Senate is actually more important than Congress or not, and be able to build up an argument with reasons and arguments. And you should be able to discuss whether Congress is representative. You will now need to go and do some additional research to get some kind of numbers under your belt, and your essay this week, if you're lucky enough to have me teaching you, will be simply to what extent is Congress representative of America, because I really want you to dig into those figures and make sure you've got those at hand just in case a question like that comes up. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, give it a like. If I made any mistakes or any cool examples that you think I should have added, then do stick that in the comment section, and I'll see you in class.